Good evening. My name is Deep Saini, and I'm the President and Vice Chancellor of Dalhousie University. I would like to begin by acknowledging that Dalhousie is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's Open Dialogue Live event, Healthy at Home. The new year is typically a time when many of us choose to make resolutions or commit to change, but this is hardly a typical year. With so many of us working and spending so much extra time at home these days, it is more important than ever to care for our mental and physical health. As someone leading an organization through this very difficult time, I often think about the myriad ways the pandemic has impacted the health of our faculty, staff, and students. Like others around the world, our community has had to cope with the stress and uncertainty posed by COVID-19 while making the sudden shift to remote working and learning and continuing to juggle each of our own unique personal and familial obligations. And while we are very lucky and grateful that in the post-secondary sector, most of us have been able to continue working, it has not been without its challenges. One thing that I have struggled with personally is the lack of face-to-face connection, casual conversations in the hallways, and getting some movement between meetings and locations. All of that has been replaced by sitting motionless for sometimes hours on end, eyes glued to the screen. This brings a unique type of exhaustion at the end of the day. In our home, we have tried to combat this by sticking to our regular routines. For example, incorporating a daily home workout into our mornings, and when possible, disconnecting from our screens an hour or two before going to bed. This evening, experts from our Faculty of Health will delve into some of the impacts of COVID-19 on our families and provide concrete ideas to help support us during this difficult time. Our host this evening will be Dr. Sara Kirk, a professor of health promotion in the School of Health and Human Performance and the scientific director of the Healthy Populations Institute. Dr. Kirk holds cross appointments with community health and epidemiology, is an adjunct professor in the Department of Applied Human Nutrition at Mount St. Vincent University, and an honorary senior scientist with the Beatrice Hunter Cancer Research Institute. Dr. Kirk's research seeks to understand how we can create supportive environments for chronic disease prevention. She applies a socio-ecological approach that considers how individual behavior is influenced by other broader factors such as income, education, and societal norms. On behalf of Dalhousie University, I wish all of you who are watching a safe and healthy 2021, and it is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kirk. Dr. Kirk, please.
Thanks very much, Dr. Sani, for that introduction. I'm your host for this panel, and as well as being a professor of health promotion in the Faculty of Health, I'm also the scientific director of the Healthy Populations Institute, which is also based here at Dalhousie. And open dialogue of live events like this one are a chance to learn from and engage with Dalhousie researchers, faculty, alumni, and students. And I'm delighted to be kicking off the 2021 series on behalf of the Healthy Populations Institute and the Faculty of Health. Just a little bit about the Healthy Populations Institute, or HPI for short. We're a multi-faculty institute at Dal that aims to improve population health by understanding and influencing the complex conditions that affect the health of communities. And as we start this new year with the shadow of COVID-19 still looming over us, it's an ideal time to be thinking about how the pandemic is impacting the health and well-being of populations, and how and why some populations are more impacted than others. I'm also thrilled to announce the launch of a brand new HPI video series that's in collaboration with this event on staying healthy during a pandemic. Scholars associated with HPI have generated some key messages from their research to create short, animated, public-friendly videos explaining the impact of the pandemic on health and well-being, and also offering strategies to better cope. So that series is launching today, and it will address physical activity, resilience, mental health, and health equity. And we're very lucky that one of the leads on this series, Dr. Sara Moore, is actually one of our panelists today. And as part of her presentation, she's going to introduce those videos as well. So now I'd like to kick off our evening with introducing our speakers for the event. And I'll start with Dr. Catherine Marr. Dr. Marr is the Canada Research Chair in Promoting Healthy Populations, a health HPI scholar, and is also an associate professor in the School of Health Administration in the Faculty of Health here at Dalhousie. Dr. Marr directs the Food Policy Lab, which is a multidisciplinary program of research on the environmental and policy determinants of diet and consumption. And she leads a range of population health, population nutrition assessment, population health intervention, and policy research projects that promote health and prevent non-communicable diseases, and often does that in partnership with underserved communities that are facing food and nutrition disparities. Next, we'll hear from Crystal Watson. And Crystal is a PhD in health candidate at Dalhousie who's pursuing her research interest in understanding the play experiences of African Nova Scotian children. And she's also the Executive Director for Recreation Nova Scotia. Crystal spent the last 20 plus years in the recreation field, working with individuals from various backgrounds. And after a number of years working in community recreation, she actually practiced as a recreation therapist for 10 years in various clinical settings and in junior high schools. Prior to her current roles, she was the lead core faculty at the Nova Scotia Community College, teaching in the Therapeutic Recreation Diploma program. And then our final speaker tonight is Dr. Sara Moore. And Dr. Moore is an assistant professor in the School of Health and Human Performance in the Faculty of Health, and also a HPI scholar. Dr. Moore's research promotes physical activity, sport, recreation, and play across the lifespan. And her work focuses on the health of children and adolescents, and she's really interested in how health behaviors track into adulthood. She recently led a participation study assessing changes in movement and outdoor play behaviors of children as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And after our speakers have given a short presentation, they'll be able to take questions from the audience, and you can direct your questions to a specific panelist or to the panel in general. So now we'll get started, and over to you, Dr. Marr.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Sarah. So it would be very easy during this time when we're spending so much time alone or here in our household bubbles to assume that food choices are a matter of, individual preference, of taste, of cost constraints, certainly, of convenience. But ever more than before, I think that what the COVID pandemic has demonstrated is that we don't make our food choices, and sorry for the term, but we don't make them in a bubble. COVID has really showed us that food choices are social. It's about, who we're eating with, where we happen to do our grocery shopping, how we get to the store, and really how our individual personal lives happen to intersect with all of the other shoppers within our community and in those stores where people might be working or people might be shopping themselves. So this is the stuff of community planning. It's the stuff of urban and regional policy. It's the stuff of the food environment. And what I'm here to do in my opening remarks is to say that the food environment really matters to our food choices now more than ever before. In our research program, we look at the environmental and policy determinants of diet. And in Atlantic Canada, we're particularly concerned about really two big factors when it comes to the environment and to policy. And one is economics, and the second is geography. So in our research, such as in our newest study, the Cellar study, which you can look up, and I'm happy to talk about a little bit later, which is at cellarstudy.ca. In our research, we're really interested in the impact of COVID on diets and nutrition in Atlantic Canada, and particularly how the economic factors and the geographic factors really shape people's dietary intakes as well as their purchasing behaviors, and how those are distributed and perhaps what disparities might exist across the whole population. On the economic side, we have a number of pre-existing conditions here in Atlantic Canada, and particularly in Nova Scotia, that we're concerned about when it comes to dietary intakes and the potential for nutrition and chronic disease risk. 1 in 5 households with children is food insecure, which means that they are unable to access food due to economic constraints. And I think it's important to point out that economic constraints is not only about a precise level of income. Really, and again, I think COVID really highlights this, is that economic constraints or economic barriers in access to food are about the whole suite of assets, economic assets that a household might have that enables them to access food in different ways. So it's about income, yes, but the timing of that income, the seasonality of that income, the precarity of the work position, the susceptibility of that work position during something like a global pandemic. It's about the ability to access other financial assets, such as home ownership or access to credit, which many higher income households end up doing in order to stabilize their purchasing over time. On the geographic side in Atlantic Canada, we have a high proportion of rural and also remote communities which also present potential barriers in terms of food access. But again, it's not only about that, the exact distance or that issue of proximity. It's about the types of stores and the mix of stores within a particular community or region. It's about the merchandising that people encounter when they choose one store over another. It's about the transportation system on the consumer side, about how to get to the store, but on the owner side as well, about how the owner can access the food supply chain effectively. We're encountering increasingly within an era of climate change, greater unpredictability again in terms of the supply chain when it comes to food. And of course, during COVID, geographic access also means adhering to public health, physical distancing requirements, and really making some tough decisions about how, when, and where we purchase food and eat it. So what's the solution to all of this? These are environmental and policy problems. So my solution is also environmental and policy. But what can we all do, as members of the Dalhousie community to be healthy at home when it comes to these potential barriers or these risk factors when it comes to having a healthy diet during the pandemic? My recommendation is to eat together. Now, you might be saying, I thought we were staying the blazes home. I thought that we weren't supposed to be together. Well, I'm really reminded of what Dr. Tam has been telling us right through the pandemic, which is that we're going to eat together apart. And by eating together, what I mean is that the food choices that we do make, what we can do is remember that these food choices are connected to others within our community. So for example, if you're purchasing local food or accessing local food, brings that food choice connected into the social environment of the community. Institutions are really tackling this in innovative ways. So for example, the Nova Scotia Health has had a longstanding healthy eating policy since 2018, which is a leader in Canada when it comes to healthy institutional policies. And that helps individuals who both work and who visit Nova Scotia Health organizations to access healthy food while they happen to be there. So these are some of the examples of eating together apart, and that's where I'd like to kick off our panel today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much Dr. Ma, for that excellent overview of the very complex factors that shape our food intake, and also some of the individual and collective actions that we can take. Next up, it's Crystal Watson, and she's going to talk to us about the role of recreation.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks to Dalhousie for the opportunity and the invitation to be able to engage folks in this manner. It's no secret that the pandemic caused a major shift in our working lives, and even for those that have been working from home already, a shift occurred where our work lives and our home lives collided in such a dramatic way. Personally, for me, the word compartmentalize developed a whole new meaning, and I'm sure it has for many others. And while it may have been chaotic for a time, the upside has been the opportunity given to us to realign and clearly identify our priorities. In many ways, we've been forced to rethink how we cope with stressors and crisis situations. We've had to take time to reflect on how to use our time and how we managed before the pandemic to deal with so much. Hopefully, we've acknowledged that we may not have been taking care of our own health and well-being. Next slide. It's important to note that all of us have experienced poor mental health at some point in our lives. Taking care of our mental health is just as important as taking care of our physical health. And in fact, they are very much intertwined. More than ever, the pandemic brought to light the importance of participating in recreation activities or hobbies to maintain our physical and, by default, our mental health. So with the few minutes I have, I want to encourage you, if you have not already done so, to take back your current free time and enjoy that time by engaging in activities. If you have not incorporated some form of recreation that would allow you some escape, I'm going to tell you why it's important to do so for your mental health. I wonder how many folks listening in this evening have struggled. Can you just go back a slide, please? Sorry. Have struggled with trying to be more productive at home while dealing with the perceptions you think others may have that you're streaming Netflix and not getting your work done. For many, working from home is not a natural space to work or even a healthy place to work from. And if you normally work from home, because of the pandemic, everyone is home or the distractions are greater, and now your routine is off. And so you try to overcompensate by doing more. Unfortunately, we are a society that prioritizes productivity. And however, it is time to be honest and recognize that being busy is overrated and leads to chronic stress. The folks at the Mayo Clinic say it best: the long-term activation of the stress response system and the subsequent overexposure to cortisol and other stress hormones can disrupt almost all of our body's processes. Those stress hormones can increase your risk of both mental and physical health problems like anxiety, depression, headaches, heart disease, sleep problems, and even memory and concentration impairment. Knowing those risks exist requires that you stop and find a way to de-stress. According to Thompson, Powell, and Montz, what can have the most positive influence on our mental health is the physical setting. The best physical setting you can be in for your mental health is the natural environment. In fact, our body experiences a physiological response to nature. We can experience strengthened and deepening with the prefrontal cortex as well as the autonomic nervous system. So what does that mean? It means we need to change the scenery, and the best and first place to go is the great outdoors. We have seen a significant increase in the number of people accessing outdoor spaces for hikes, biking, and water-based activities as a way to decompress from the stress of the pandemic. We need to do more of this to stay well. The National Bureau, next slide, please. The National Bureau of Economic Research in the US reported that the pandemic has made the average workday 48.5 minutes longer. Now that work is home and home is work, employees may not properly disengage, making it impossible for them to unplug and refresh. That's according to experts at the Society for Human Resource Management. Additionally, use of vacation time decreased during the pandemic. Given the increased anxiety stirred by the pandemic, taking vacation time is critical. Despite the inability to travel long distances, planning and staycations will help you to create a real break. The key, however, is ensuring that you can fully detach from work. The drama model integrates existing need and recovery models to explain why leisure is connected to optimal functioning. Drama refers to 6 psychological needs: detachment, relaxation, autonomy, mastery, meaning, and affiliation, and asserts that detachment and relaxation, or we could call it detachment and recovery, are the most important psychological needs for our subjective well-being. Without detaching and relaxing, we are at increased risk of burnout, so we need time to return to homeostasis. To reach this, we need to ensure that we are intentional in choosing or creating quality recreation and leisure experiences to reach a higher level of mental well-being. So remember, we need vacations for recovery. Focus on experiences that help you detach and relax from the everyday stressors associated with our work lives. Next slide, please. Cluttered minds doesn't allow us to acknowledge the busyness or embrace the drama when it comes to our leisure choices. As we continue to navigate the pandemic, working from home, and the quest to stay healthy, it is important to focus on what we're doing, thinking, and feeling throughout all of this. To be mindful means that we are setting the intention to slow down and pay attention. There are 3 things that we must do to practice mindfulness. The first is to pay attention, be in the present, ask yourself in this moment, what are you feeling or thinking? The second quality of mindfulness and challenges us to be curious or explore what is happening around us without judgment. It's difficult, yes. However, we need to try to not be critical of what we may be feeling and thinking. The final quality is to practice acceptance. Embrace the moment as it is and don't try to change anything. If we set the intention to do these 3 things, we are working to decrease our stress levels and improve our mental health. Next time, while you are out on a walk, set out to really pay attention and be present with your thoughts and feelings. Avoid being critical to those thoughts and feelings, and yet accepting of them by not making a plan to change them. Just be still in the moment and take in all the sights and sounds around you. People who cannot find time for recreation are obliged sooner or later to find time for illness. As you reflect on this quote, I again encourage you to make time for leisure, for recreation, for fun. However you define that unobligated time you have in your day to do something that will allow you to escape the busy, take some time to recover from the stresses of the workday, and be intentional with recentering your mind on your mental well-being. So I'd like to thank you again for being attentive to this and look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Crystal. And I really like the fact that you really connected the physical and mental well-being within that presentation. It's so important for us, and I'm certainly going to take away the mindful, not mindful, to my own thinking. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our final panelist for this evening, Dr. Moore, and she's going to be talking about the work that she's been doing around COVID-19 and physical activity. Over to you then, Sarah.
Hi there. Good evening, everyone. Really lovely to be here today. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your comments, and to Dal Alumni. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and if you can just have the the slides. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So what I'd like to do today is just to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing to evaluate the healthy movement behaviors of children and youth and their families in Canada as part of a study that's looking at the impact of COVID-19. So I'll share a little bit about that, and then, as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, we have created some whiteboard animations, and I'll describe what that is a little bit later, to be able to help to restore and preserve and promote our health across COVID-19 and as we recover from this pandemic. So these are the 24-hour movement behaviors for children and youth. There are also movement behaviors, 24-hour movement guidelines for adults as well. And what this does is it integrates the full day. So we used to think that we could look just at physical activity or just at sleep. And now what researchers are doing is we're recognizing, and health professionals, that we're recognizing that the whole 24-hour day is really, really critical. So one thing is going to impact the other. If you're more active, you'll sleep better. If you sleep better, you'll be more active. If you're less sedentary and watch less screens, again, it's going to impact, these things impact on each other. And so the 24-hour movement guidelines for children and youth suggest that children need at least 60 minutes of heart-pumping physical activity per day, lots of light activity, adequate sleep, and less sitting time, and specifically less than 2 hours or no more than 2 hours on screens. And so what we saw in March, so March 12th rolled around, and we were doing our normal routines, and then we had this announcement that there was a global pandemic from the World Health Organization. This, as the other speaker said, really threw off our typical routines. We saw parks closed, schools closed, even other green spaces closed, and those things really were different depending on where you were in Canada. Some restrictions were more and some were less depending on the region that you lived in. And so what we looked to do in that time was to look to see how the movement behaviors were being impacted by some of those restrictions related to COVID-19. So we conducted a study of 1,500 Canadians looking at across Canada to see the changes that parents reported for their children's physical activity. And as a result, we published a number of papers last year related to that topic, looking at things like the neighborhood environment, the type of environment that you lived in. So if you lived in a really high density area or close to streets, we also looked at regional differences between provinces and so on to be able to see the impacts of COVID-19 on these healthy movement behaviors. So again, physical activity, as well as light activities, screen time, sedentary behaviors, and sleep. So as you can expect, we didn't do so well in terms of maintaining some of those healthy movement behaviors. And that's completely understandable. It's a global pandemic. So what did we find? Well, if we're looking at individuals or children specifically meeting the 24-hour movement guidelines, less than 3% of children during the height of the pandemic, so we did this first survey in April and we've done a follow-up survey in October, were meeting the 24-hour movement guidelines. So that means that many children were not being active, they were being much more sedentary and watching a lot more screen time, as you would probably expect during the pandemic. It wasn't all bad news. Sleep wasn't dramatically impacted. Children were sleeping a little bit more, as well as we did see family activities really go up. So I think that one of the silver linings of the pandemic was there was that reset to home activities. We were all home together. Families were home together. We saw families pulling out more board games, more puzzles, spending more time doing things together. And parents were very creative and very resourceful and incredibly resilient during the pandemic in order to cope with the restrictions and the changes that they were experiencing. We did see some other things like if you had a dog at home, then dogs were able to pull you outside. So there were some groups that were more active as a result of some of their home related factors. when we looked back into September, this article was published by a colleague of mine, and we thought, you know what, there's been such a dramatic decrease in our healthy movement behaviors, including our physical activity. And this little article from the conversation, my colleague spoke about, is this going to be the least fit generation going back into school? And we know that physical activity and sedentary behavior and as well as sleep, having adequate and movement, having less screen time and sedentary behaviors, and having adequate sleep are really related to those health-related factors for the family. So we know that people that meet the 24-hour movement behaviors have better cardiometabolic health, so your heart health, less of a likelihood to develop things like diabetes. In addition to that, there's a number of other benefits. As Crystal was mentioning, there are significant mental health benefits. So we know that there's cognitive benefits to being active. Children that are active have better academic skills, as well as even things like immune function. So children that are not meeting those 24-hour movement guidelines are at risk for a number of health-related challenges, and those translate across the lifespan. A lot of these health behaviors track across the lifespan. So what I'd like to show next is a video that we've created, whiteboard animation, highlighting some of the challenges with the pandemic that we were seeing. And we've created 5 videos with the Healthy Populations Institute to stay healthy at home. I'll show you a little bit more about the other ones in just a moment, but these are 2-minute snapshots into some of the findings from our study.
Welcome to HPI, the Healthy Populations Institute at Dalhousie University. So, we all know that being active is important for our health, but during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been a lot less active. Yep, let's take a look. These are the 24-hour movement guidelines for children and youth. Kids ages 5 to 17 years are supposed to get 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per day. That's like when you breathe heavier and sweat a little bit. Kids are also supposed to be lightly active throughout the day, like walking to school or doing household chores. As for screen time is supposed to be no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time per day. That's all screens, like computers, TV, tablets, and smartphones. And finally, kids ages 5 to 13 years are supposed to sleep 9 to 11 hours per night, and kids ages 14 to 17 years are supposed to sleep 8 to 10 hours per night. Well, this pandemic has changed the way kids are moving. Kids are less active and sitting more. Kids are on their phones and tablets more. Kids are also sleeping more. In fact, in our big national survey, we found that less than 3% of kids were meeting the 24-hour movement behavior guidelines. And in our other big survey, where we assessed the movement behaviors of kids with disabilities, less than 1.5% were meeting the guidelines. Eek! That means that most kids were moving less and sitting more, and that's not good for their health. So, as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, let's think of ways to get moving. Try to get outdoors and into nature. Try a new exercise or activity app. And get moving with your family. Like our health officials say, let's be kind and be safe, and let's all get active. Thanks for swinging by the HPI.
Okay. Thanks so much for reviewing that. So that's the first of our series for the whiteboard animations, and I'll share with you the other ones in just a moment. But really what these are trying to do are highlight and provide some suggestions for families, and we did see some really wonderful things in terms of movement behaviors happen during the pandemic. And one of the things that we saw is that perhaps there's this time to reset, and I think Crystal was saying this as well, acknowledging all of the significant financial and health-related consequences of the pandemic. What are perhaps some ways that we can reset and move forward in terms of our healthy movement behaviors? So again, we can restore and preserve our health in this pandemic and as we recover from COVID-19. There's been lots of work around making sure that we're using our environment. And so perhaps this is a shift to be able to walk or bike or wheel to school. And so there was this article in September saying that perhaps we're giving an opportunity for people to get active and get walking to school, get walking in their neighborhoods. And so instead of these structured activities, what we found was a lot of families were saying, we no longer have these structured sports that our kids are going to or that we're going to. We're going to have to think about being active in non-structured ways or in child-led ways. And so this was one of, I think, the things that we can think about in terms of increasing our movement behaviors, whether that's walking a little bit further, parking a bit further away, or if we are thinking about moving in your neighborhood, going for walks in your neighborhood, or like this article talks about walking to school with families. Crystal talked a little bit about this. We saw certainly an upshift in the number of folks that were shopping for outdoor recreation equipment. The outdoors is an excellent space to be for our physical and mental health, and I think that it was a great addition that Crystal had mentioned there with her work for recreation. So we know that we're being encouraged to play together as a family unit, to get outside and try to enjoy the beauty of all seasons. So I know that it's going to be cold and rainy and snowy, and so if we can try to ensure that we're getting outside regardless of the weather, then that will hopefully inspire our children and next generations to continue to enjoy the outdoors. There has been a shift in our education system, and certainly conversations in our education system about how to change outdoor education and get outside more to learn, and what's the interaction between learning and teaching in the outdoors. And so I think that, again, it's inspired a generation of teachers to think and be creative, which of course our educators already are so wonderful in this area and so innovative. And so thinking about how can we get outdoors in order to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 and use the natural environment for what we can. Dr. Sara Kirk wrote a lovely article, and this is available on the Healthy Populations Institute, the DAL website, looking at how we can support children going back to school. So I'll encourage you to take a look at that one as well. And then here's an article that I was asked to write for the Vancouver Coastal Health Research Institute, looking at some tips for staying active at home. And really, the article came down to me providing just a couple of suggestions. Number one, give yourself grace. If you're watching too much TV and if you're a little bit less active, it's a global pandemic. Let's just give ourselves a little bit of grace and freedom to not necessarily meet all of the movement behaviors, and then be able to work together as a family and provide some outside time for kids, as well as some other leisure time for children. And then in addition to that, those ideas around getting away from structured activities because they're not happening, and really ensure that you're working on child-led activities, playing with your children, just getting down and into play with kids. And then in addition to that, looking for resources online. And one of the things that the HPI is working to do is to provide additional resources through the series that I've mentioned here. So I'll encourage you to check out the series. There are 5 whiteboard animation videos like the one you saw today. The first, as I mentioned, is on COVID-19 and the impacts on children's movement behaviors. The second is on the 24-hour movement behavior guidelines for adults, and specifically on how sedentary behaviors can negatively impact your cardiovascular health. The third is looking at ways of accessing mental health care for children and youth, and features the work looking at virtual mental health care with IWK. The fourth is featuring our flagship, the HPI flagship, and it looks at health disparities specific to Black Canadians and African Nova Scotians. And the last is looking at ways to be resilient as we leave this pandemic. And so that's featuring some of the work of Dr. Michael Unger. And so there's the YouTube channel here. We'll encourage you to go and have a look there. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time today. Looking forward to any questions that you might have.
Thanks ever so much, Sarah, and for showcasing those videos so well. Some comments certainly in the chat around what a great way to do dissemination of key messages. So that's fantastic. We're going to bring the rest of the panel onto screen, I think, now, and have the opportunity to take some questions from the audience. I'm just going to start first of all. We've had a number of comments on the chat, really agreeing with the need to take more time to protect our health and well-being through recreation and being outside. And I would add the need to nourish our minds and our bodies is really, really important. I just wonder if each of you just give what have been your personal strategies for maintaining your own health and well-being over this time. Maybe we'll start with in the order of who presented. So Kathy, would you want to just start with your top tip?
Let me just unmute. Honestly, my top tip is exactly what I described. It's just reminding myself regularly of the ways that I'm connected to others, and like in the community, in my lab, I have a weekly lab gathering, and it's such a touch point for me because it reminds me that even though I'm sitting here, at my dinner table, that I have a community that I can rely on and that relies on me. What's really struck me during COVID is, the power of collective action. We saw the efforts around Black Lives Matter and around and around electoral politics, and this renewed kind of interest in what people can do when they band together. And that's what I've been hanging on to.
You and me both. Crystal.
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I realized when the pandemic first started that I wasn't as active as I could have been. And there was so much opportunity for me to do that. So I immediately started taking walks because the Zoom meetings, and they were killing me, and I could feel my body just was seizing up a lot more. And I said, okay, I got to get out of here. And I literally started walking around my neighborhood and those sorts of things. And just recently, my daughter and we've been doing yoga online. So she lives in New Glasgow and I live in Truro. And so we get on our phones and watch each other do yoga. So that's been fun. Yeah.
Thanks. And Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, great question. And I'll echo some of what Catherine and Crystal had mentioned as well. I think trying to keep routines has been really important for our family. And even though there was times when we weren't going out the door to work or to school, we would take a walk in the morning and then come back and sit at the dining room table like it was our workspace. And so we would typically have those times to travel to work or to school. And when you're working from home, you don't necessarily get up and move around. And so I think taking those transitions times to be able to get outdoors. I think another thing that we have been trying to do is just be very cognizant of the fact that we're all going through the same storm, but we all have very different boats. And so the resources that people have are very different. We recognize that our family is in a pretty privileged position to be able to have us have the flexibility to stay home while my kids are home, and to be able to go outside and be able to provide the space to be able to play. And not everyone has that. So we've been really working with our kids to be able to share that we're in a privileged place, and that different people will have different resources and concerns and needs. And I think the other thing that that our family is really trying to do is to, and I mentioned it in my talk, is embrace the beauty of every season. And so regardless of the day, we're going outside. We've put our challenge at the beginning of January to be outside 1,000 hours over the course of 2021. And so that's about 3 hours a day to be outside if you're looking at how to break that down. And so we're challenging our family. We're scribing it on the fridge to be able to see if we're spending that time outdoors and realizing the benefits of being outdoors. But that's hard to do when it's pouring rain. So my son, my youngest, he now calls those snail days or worm days. And so we go out and we're in our rain gear and we search for whatever insects or animals there are that we can reunite as a result of storms that have come through our area. So I think just really trying to embrace the beauty of every season, not just go outside when it's beautiful, not wait for the nice days to do that. And I think that that's something else that we are really trying to do as a family.
Great, thank you. The other thing that really struck me as I was listening to your presentations, and it's something that I've often sort of spoken about myself as well, that we really are seeing that healthy behavior is abnormal behavior in a lot of ways. So I'm struck by the fewer than 3% of children were actually meeting the 24-hour movement guidelines, and that need to really shift the way that we think about health and well-being, so that we're not so that the healthier behavior becomes the default choice. And you had some slides there, Sarah, where you talked about how schools have done that. And one of the comments in the chat was actually from an academic. So Raghav, you mentioned about the fact that we're often our own worst enemy within academia. We are the ones who are on our screens up until late at night, and again, the pandemic really did challenge many of my colleagues in terms of getting teaching online, and with especially those who have children as well, how challenging all those things were. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on what can Dalhousie as an institution be doing to actually support the health and well-being of our community. And I don't know who wants to go first on that one. I'll throw it open to any of you.
Well, I know for me, particularly I have these dual roles. I'm a student, and then I'm also executive director, and I find that I have to put a limit on the meetings that I have. Like, only I can control that. I know that I can. It can be challenging sometimes, and I think that maybe that's a first step. Is, can we make the commitment that we're only going to be on Zoom 2-3 hours max, and then everything else could be an active meeting in some way. Can we go for a walk somewhere, or have a phone call and we can walk, together? And I really like Dr. Ma's idea of, having a meal together. I think, doing a quick meeting to not only catch up with your colleagues, but, if there's, maybe one item that you can talk about that's work related, but at least you'll have that opportunity to connect. So there just needs to be some purposefulness to the times that we spend together.
Great. Anybody else want to weigh in there?
Sure, I can go next. So I think as an educator at Dalhousie, there are ways that I'm trying to connect with my students. And one of the things that I think that we all need to do is recognize, regardless of who we're talking to, is that the people are wearing many hats. So someone might be a student in my class, they may be a caregiver, they may be a friend, they're probably a friend. And there's lots of different roles that person is taking on. And so I think that again, as I mentioned, just being graceful with yourself, being graceful with others, and recognizing that during the pandemic especially, but always, people are wearing multiple hats and engaging in multiple ways. So I think that's one of the things that I think we can do as educators at Dalhousie. The second thing as a researcher is, I think, continuing to engage with the community. The community brings the questions that they have, the anecdotal evidence that we're seeing from school teachers, or from recreation leaders, or from other nutritionists or dietitians. Those folks are coming and they're coming with excellent knowledge to be able to share and say, hey, I'm seeing this. And what we can do as researchers is support those efforts and come alongside to be able to support, to create and gather evidence around that and share back with the community. We wouldn't be able to do the research that we do without the community. So I think we can all do a better job at engaging in that way as well. So I'll leave it there. I have lots of things, but I'll pass it over to Catherine.
And I'll just quickly add that, Dalhousie's efforts to, even without COVID, we're in a very precarious academic job environment for new grads and for those early in career. And the efforts that Dalhousie could make, and in partnership with principal investigators to, access things like bridge funding for research and those kinds of things, those make a huge difference because, that's something that an institution can do. And it's not just food insecurity is associated with income and education, but it's not a linear relationship. So, in a precarious work environment, that's something I'm also always thinking about for trainees and for our early career research staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. We have a question from Brenda Merritt, and she's asking, is curious if any of the panelists have had anything to add related to mindfulness, meditation, breath work. So, for example, mindful eating, mindful attention to nature, etc. So again, I'll throw it open to whoever wants to take the first stab at that.
I have something quick to jump in. I'll just give a shout out to Canada's Food Guide. The 2019 Canada's Food Guide actually speaks about how, the social context for eating, including mindfulness. So check it out again.
Okay. Anything else from Crystal, Sarah? Do you want to add to that?
Crystal, you spoke to this in your talk, so I'll pass it over to you first.
Yeah, I was just thinking, one day I went to Victoria Park, and I'd never been much of a birder. So I don't pay attention to things like that. Oftentimes birds scare me. But there's one day when I was walking, it was almost like there were about 1 million different birds, different types of birds there, and they were all singing a different song. And it just really, it calmed me. It made me feel as though I had just entered a different universe, so to speak. So I think, whenever you're out walking, I think just if you could just zone in on one particular thing, whether it's the sounds of the birds or the smells that might be coming from the different foliage that's on the pathways, the trickling of the water from streams that might be in the distance. I think if you zero in on those, that will help you to become more mindful in those particular settings.
Yes, I must say that's actually something that I have really valued. And I kind of joke about this, but it's probably the same for everybody. My commute is up the stairs. Mm-hmm. I didn't actually used to. I was quite bad when I was in the office for actually eating at my desk. Now I commute back down the stairs. I go and I have a meal. I make a meal and sit and have that. And I watch the birds in the garden. There's we have bird feeders out there, and I've seen birds I didn't even know we had in Nova Scotia over the last couple of months since I've been putting out feed for them over the winter. We have another question. This one's specifically for Sarah, but again, anybody can chip in, from Erin. And you shared about schools investing more of their efforts in outdoor classrooms as a means to embrace nature and increase movement. In your research, have you come across ideas or recommendations to pass on to online school teachers to help support the kids studying at home in a similar way? And to help them keep on track with movement guidelines, given that their day is structured greatly in the SIP domain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. One thing, I'll just go backwards just for a moment, but one of the things for mindfulness meditation from Brenda's question is I would really encourage unplugging. So, it's hard to be mindful if you have your phone connected to you. But yeah, Erin, thanks so much for your question. And so I'm part of a group called PlayToNet. And so this is a group that is in conjunction with Outdoor Play Canada. And I'm working on a project with PlayToNet, which is play play, learning, and teaching outdoors. And so if you check out their Twitter feed or their website, there are some resources there related to teaching, learning in the outdoor environment. But in terms of getting active and if folks are kind of teaching to online groups of students, one of the things that I noticed, at least for my kids in March, some of the lessons that were coming home were lessons of math and lessons of science that we were doing at home, or reading and so on. But I was waiting for the gym lesson. So I was really looking for active things to come home as well. And so I think that one thing that teachers have done really a great job at is giving a little bit more of a holistic curriculum, including ways to be active at home. And so just as an example, we had our kids count how many steps it is from our house to our mailbox, from our house to wherever. And then estimate which one would be more. And so I think that one of the things that teachers are really creative with is thinking how lessons can kind of go together. And so if there are ways that we can make what would normally be an inactive lesson an active lesson. So instead of just estimating, well, now we're going to estimate step count, or now we're going to estimate heart rate, and how do you take heart rate? And kids are able to do that, and they think it's a lot of fun. So I think that if we can start to mix some of our lessons together and make them more active, then that's one way to do that. But do check out the PlatoNet resources, and if there's other questions that you have, feel free to email me at sarah.moore@dal.ca.
I just actually also want to give a shout out to for those of you in Nova Scotia. There's a great initiative happening down the South Shore called the Active Smarter Kids Project, that they're also looking to bring that around the rest of the province. And it actually is based on a Norwegian model, which is really about getting kids outside and active in their classrooms. So they're learning math, they're learning literacy, but they're doing it outside, and then they're doing it while they're moving. And we've basically continued a way of teaching our children, which involves sitting down for long periods of time. Why not shift that around? And there's some good evidence that it actually does help with their learning, as well as helps with their activity levels in school, that they are moving. So certainly something to be thinking about. I don't see any more questions. We do have I think another minute or so, but I just wonder if the panelists have any sort of final thoughts to share with us before we wrap up.
Who would like to go first?
I guess I would just conclude by saying that although I really value Together Apart currently, I really can't wait for it together. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of you on the panel, and hopefully we'll have lots of chances for in-person panels like this down the road.
Go ahead, Crystal.
I was just going to say, echo Dr. Ma's comments, and really, just reiterate, get out and have some fun. Like, it doesn't have to be anything, planned or structured or anything like that. Just do something, just to take away the stresses of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that what I would say is that we have all experienced challenges during the pandemic. Families have experienced these challenges during the pandemic. It's certainly not to understate the significant health and financial consequences of the pandemic. But I think we can start to think of ways that the pandemic can inspire us to reset how we were previously living. So if you were really busy and pre-programmed before, maybe what this pandemic is doing is showing you and your family that unstructured activities are possible. playing together is possible. Eating together is possible. Going to your kitchen instead of your bedroom to eat, as for Sara, is possible. And so I think that, and what I'm hoping is that we're able to come out of the pandemic with a new sense of how we can work towards healthy behaviors in all of their ways.
Thank you. I think there's great wisdom in those words from all of you, and I just want to thank you all for your contributions to the session this evening. I think it's been very helpful. Lots of great information coming out. Once again, I'd just like to remind you that the HPI's animated video series is been timed for this event as well. So Staying Healthy During a Pandemic is now live on our HPI YouTube channel, which you can. If you just Google Healthy Populations Institute and YouTube, they should show up. As you saw in Sarah's presentation, these are fun, family-friendly, but with simple messages around coping strategies to promote better health, wellness, and health equity in our communities. And I'll just leave you with that real word around, together, I think is a really lovely way to think of how we move forward from this pandemic, that there's much that we can do as a society to make our world a healthier place for all of us, and to recognize the value of our health and well-being. It is a resource that we squander at our peril, really. And again, just sort of wish you all a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you happen to be while you're watching this event. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.